I don't know if anyone's going to read this. I don't even know if anyone will care. But I have to tell somebody. It's too much to process right now, and maybe if I get some of it off my chest, it will make it easier to handle. I'm getting ready to go into the unknown, and I feel like someone needs to know why. Someone needs to know how it came to all this, and how I came to be a potential murderer/avenging angel. Above all else, I need to tell someone about Charlie. I'd known Charlie since we were in grade school together. Charlie thought of us as brothers, since he didn't have any of his own, and loved us like family. Despite that, never think we were the most important people in Charlie's life. No, the most important person in Charlie's life was his grandmother. Charlie's grandmother, he'd always called her Grandmom, was the one who raised Charlie since the day he was born. Charlie's mother died in childbirth, and his father died before he was even born, so without a guardian, that just left Charlie and his grandmom. Grandmom and Charlie. Charlie's grandmom lived out in the country, in an old wooden farmhouse with a big backyard and acres of fields for growing things. She rented the land to sharecroppers and must have done pretty well for herself because Charlie couldn't recall a time she'd ever had to work. Charlie didn't have any other family, none that he'd ever met anyway, and for the first 8 years of his life it was just the two of them alone in that farmhouse. Charlie said he remembered being sick a lot as a kid, and most of his earlier memories were he and his grandmom on the couch while she nursed him back to health from one illness or another. Grandmom would sit at home with him while he convalesced, watching Sesame Street and eating whatever Grandmom could whip up in the kitchen. Most days, Charlie would just spend the whole day on her lap while she rocked him and hummed strange little Russian songs to him. Grandmom wasn't originally from here, you see. She had emigrated during the Second Great War, and she and his grandfather had moved out to the country because it reminded her of her childhood home. Coming from the old country, she had all kinds of folk remedies, good-tasting recipes, and strange little songs that she would sing to Charlie as he drifted off to sleep or lay sick on the couch. One in particular that Charlie recalled fondly had become a ritual of sorts, a ritual that goes on to this day, I assume, that took on the normalcy of time and repetition. She would take him on her lap, pull his face close to hers, and place her hands on his cheeks as she put their foreheads together. Charlie recalled the bumpy, veiny skin there beneath his smooth baby skin as she did this, and the warmth that always seemed to radiate from her. With their foreheads pressed together, she would sing a strange song to him in her thick Russian tone before releasing him and planting a kiss on his forehead. "What does it mean, Grandmom?" Charlie would always ask, and the asking was as much a part of the ritual as the ritual itself. "It means," she would say in her warm, gravelly voice, "always together, even when apart, always a part of me, here in my heart." Charlie had never thought it was odd that he lived in relative isolation with his grandmother. Not until he started school. His grandmom had tried to homeschool him for a few years, but her teaching wasn't up to the state standards, so she had grudgingly allowed Charlie to attend public school. Here Charlie came into contact with other children, and first learned how strange his situation was. In class, we would do assignments or draw pictures of our family, and Charlie's was always the smallest when put up on the bulletin board with the rest. Charlie began to wonder why he didn't have any uncles or aunts or cousins, or any family besides Grandmom. When he asked her, though, she always shrugged and gave him the same answer. "Your grandfather and I had the one child. Your father was not a strong boy. He was sick, often like you are, and we were afraid to have another. By the time he was old enough to over his sickness, your grandfather was dead, and it was only me and your father." That made Charlie feel a little better. His father had been like him in that sense, sickly and alone with his grandmom, so it couldn't be that strange. That didn't stop the other kids from teasing him, though. I remember Charlie when he first arrived at school, and the other kids had him pegged as an oddball from the get-go. Going to school in the early 90s, it was all about how cool you were, how many cool things you had on your clothes. Charlie showed up the first day of school looking like the boy from the hot chocolate box my mom always bought. He wore suspenders and stockings, knee boots, and shirts with weird fringes on them. He stuck out like a sore thumb. This, mixed with his funny way of talking and his stunted knowledge base, made the other kids think he was slow and kind of a dweeb. He came in for quite a bit of ridicule, and I recall it was a hard couple of days before my friends and I got involved. This is where I come into Charlie's story, I guess. I had never taken part in the teasing, and over time I began to feel bad for him. I pushed some of my friends to invite him to play with us, and we were surprised to find not a dumb kid, but an imaginative kid, who joined in our games eagerly. His grandmom, had taught him a little Russian, which we thought was just the coolest, and we gave him some of our old clothes to wear so he didn't stand out quite so much. Together, we played G.I. Joes or superheroes or whatever the game of the day happened to be, and outside of play, we helped Charlie stand up for himself and make the bullies stop. As we got older, Charlie stayed at our place a lot, and we really helped him come out of his shell and adapt to life outside of Grandmom's house. We were friends with Charlie all the way through high school, and after high school, we all thought we might get an apartment together. Zach, Tristan, Charlie, and I, so we could attend college together. Charlie was hesitant. He didn't want to leave his poor old grandmom alone in the middle of the woods. So when he turned up at the house a few days later with a scant few possessions, I was pretty surprised. He had 2 plastic bags of clothes, a zipper bag of toiletries. After some coaxing, he told me he and his grandmom had had a really nasty fight. This surprised me, because I'd never heard of Charlie's grandmom ever raising her voice to him in all the time I'd known him. And he seemed just as shocked about the outburst as we were. She had refused to give him any of his stuff, except what he'd brought with him, and told him not to expect her to send him money or anything else. If he moved out now, he was on his own. You could tell how upset he was, poor guy, and we helped him out as best we could. He ended up sleeping on my couch until his first Pell check came in, and after that, he just kinda made do. I had expected that would be the end of his closeness with his grandmom, but I couldn't have been more wrong. After a few weeks of silence, she went back to calling him every day, and to our astonishment, he made plans to have dinner with her and help her with her shopping. She would send him money sometimes, and he would go over several days a week to eat dinner or lunch, and slowly things began to return to normal. She still wouldn't let him take any of his stuff out of her house, but he got some new stuff, and by the time his first semester was done, he had everything that he needed. Things went on in this way for about 3 years, at least until last Wednesday. Charlie and I had just got back from class when he got a call from his grandma. His face fell as they talked, and you could tell that Charlie was barely holding back tears. She hadn't been doing well for several years, nearly from the time Charlie moved out, and I personally thought it was a guilt trip to keep her grandson close to home, though I'd never say as much to Charlie. He talked to her for a few minutes and then immediately went to his room and packed an overnight bag. He told me to tell his counselor that he had a family emergency and needed to go home to be with his grandmother. When I asked him what was going on, he told me that she was dying and she wanted him to stay with her until she passed. I commiserated with him and told him to give her my best and to stay in contact so we knew when he'd be back. That was a week ago, and it was the last time anyone has ever seen or heard from Charlie. His car is gone, his things are gone from his room, and Charlie has disappeared without a trace. I drove the hour to his grandmother's house, hoping to find some clues when I got there, only to be greeted by a stranger when the door opened. She was a tall, dark-haired woman with lank hair and a swollen, pregnant belly, and she was no one I had ever seen before. Hell, Charlie and his grandmom were the only 2 people I'd ever seen at the house before now. She claimed to be a distant relative that had inherited the house from Charlie's grandmother when she died. She didn't seem to speak English very well, and was completely unsure as to who Charlie was or where he had gone to. We quickly lost patience with each other, and she yelled at me to leave before she called the authorities. I seethed all the way home, but I couldn't get any answers out of her. I got my answers last night. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning when something woke me up from a deep sleep. My legs were full of pins and felt like someone was sitting on them. I rolled over, thinking one of my roommates had wandered in drunk, only to find Charlie sitting on my bed. Even in the dim light, I could tell something was wrong. Charlie looked bad. Withered somehow, like a grape that gets left in the crisper drawer for too long. Or a corpse after it's dried out in a grave. He spoke to me, his voice a rattling rasp in my ears, and told me that something had happened. He'd gone to be with his grandmom. He found her on her deathbed, and she'd reached for him with her withered arms when he'd come in. He'd slumped, weeping by her bedside, and she'd reached out with her wrinkled hands and touched his face. He looked at her, and she had asked him to put his forehead against hers, so she could say the words one last time. She was my grandmom, and I loved her. How could I deny her anything? He said, his voice racked with pain. So he let her draw his face to hers, and she said the old familiar words as she always had. Always together, even when apart. Always a part of me, here in my heart. But when she kissed him on the forehead, his lips already starting to ask what it meant, he felt something strange. It was like she was taking everything from me. My breath, my blood, my bones, my seed, and all with that single kiss on my forehead. As she had taken all of it from him, he had crumpled up into a dried husk as she changed before his eyes. Her hair darkened, her skin tightened, her eyes sparkled, and he said that her belly had grown large even as her breasts grew heavy with milk. When she stood over him, she was 50 years younger, a girl of 20, and I realized that she was the woman who had opened the door for me. She stood over him, cackling at his desiccated form, and her face was devoid of the love that had always been there. "Now you see why I have kept you close all these years. Now you'll see the fruit of my labor, just as your father did before you and your grandfather before him," she said, looking down at Charlie without pity or remorse. "Why?" he asked huskily, his voice dry as a desert. "Why have you done this?" "Why? This is the state that befalls all your line. Males for centuries and centuries. Males from the first of your name to crawl upon this earth. He told me I was ugly. He spat on my love, and he promised me that I would never have him. I promised him that I would have all of his line, bear them and break them. So I have from that time on. Your son," she said, and gave her belly a little stroke, "will be no different." And as she stood cackling over him, Charlie died and passed into the void that waits beyond. He told me all of this as I sat huddled by the head of my bed, but promised me that she was wrong. She would have no more from his line. The cycle would end with his son. He told me some things he understood now, and called his grandmother a vedma, which is the Russian word for witch. He also called her a strigoi, but he hopes he's wrong about that. A mortal man may kill a vedma if he is very lucky, he told me, but a strigoi is another matter entirely. He made me promise if I ever called him friend, to rescue my son and kill his grandmom, once and for all. It will be dark soon, and he says that tonight will be the night of her delivery, which will make her weak. I'm leaving this here just in case I don't come back, in case someone out there might save Charlie's son if I fail. I have the things I need, and midnight will be here before I know it. I hope I'm strong enough to do what must be done. I pray I don't come to my friends in the night with a similar request. I pray that I can break this curse and make Charlie its last victim. "Daddy, look at the picture I drew." I put on my best appraising my son's artwork face and looked down at the picture he had drawn. I recoiled a little when I saw it, not really sure what to make of it. It was a baby head, like a baby doll, but no body was attached to it. The hair was gone, nothing but dots on the scalp, and the eyes were missing and staring openly. A big silver loop like a smile ran through the head, and the bottom was covered with little metal spider legs. I looked at it for a few minutes, wondering what this horrible thing was, but suddenly it came to me, and I felt silly for being so anxious. "Good job, buddy. It's the spider baby from Toy Story, right?" I said, handing it back to him. "No, Daddy, it's the monster that comes to my window at night." I sighed audibly. The monster had become a point of contention in our house as of late. Every night for the past 3 weeks, my son had woken up screaming because there was a monster outside his window. Ever since we had moved into our new house, it had been a regular nightly event, and I had almost started waking up before the screaming started. It never mattered how fast I ran, though. There was never anything there when I arrived. He was always sitting in his bed, pointing out the window and crying about a monster looking in at him. When we got home, he grabbed his tablet and began to watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, as he was wont to do after school. I made sure he was comfortable on the couch and not likely to run out the front door as I started washing dishes. Between the three of us, we usually make a fair amount of dishes. I was just finishing up when my wife came home, grimacing at the picture on the fridge as she came in. "That's an interesting piece of artwork," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Apparently, that's the monster that's been waking him up every night," I said, making her frown as she sat at the table. "Ugh, the monster again. This has to stop. We have to do something." I shrugged, tossing the drying rag into the sink. "I wish I knew what. What if you spent the night in there tonight?" I looked dubiously at her. "What, like on the floor or something?" "No, you could sleep in the other bed in there." I always forget there are 2 beds in my son's room. They were bunk beds, one on the ground level and one on the top, One was supposed to be for guests, playmates, or cousins who wanted to spend the night. The other was for him. In reality, though, it was more of an excuse for my son to pick a bed to sleep in every night. He usually slept on the top bunk, sitting right beneath the window, but sometimes he liked to sleep on the smaller bed at the floor level. Okay, I guess I'll spend the night in there. Promise you'll reward me in the morning, I teased. She said she would and giggled when I kissed her on the ear. That reward would never come, though. That night, we went through our nightly routine after dinner. We brushed our teeth, put on our pajamas, and got ready for bed. As I picked up the book and directed him to the loft bed, though, he grabbed my arm and shook his head. I thought he would argue about bedtime. He wasn't a big one for bedtime. Instead, he shook his head and pointed to the bottom bunk. "Can I sleep there?" he asked, pointing at the bunk. I sighed and looked up at the top bunk, wondering how I would get up that tiny little staircase. One look at my son showed me something was seriously going on, though. He looked scared, too scared for a kid his age, and I was kind of scared myself all of a sudden. What was so scary about this bed? This wasn't the first time he'd balked at the idea of sleeping in the loft bed, and I was kind of hesitant to climb into it. I got over that quickly and told him he could sleep on the bottom if he wanted. So we read our Clifford book, I turned out the lights, and swung up into the top bunk as I snuggled down to sleep. For a few hours, I slept fitfully. I was awakened in the dark of the night by a light scratch at the window. It wasn't a loud scraping. It was soft, like something rubbing lightly against the glass as it attempted to get my attention. Maybe a fingernail, maybe a knife tip, but it was consistent in its efforts as it rubbed. After the picture earlier, my mind tried to conjure an image of a baby head with metal spider legs scrabbling at the glass. In my dream, it dug perfect grooves into the window, like a jewel thief's tool in a movie, and it was making progress through the glass. The baby's head had a mouthful of metal teeth to go along with its legs. The teeth gnashed at the glass as the legs cut, and I could do little more than lay there and watch him cut through the transparent barrier. I woke up as he scuttled in, leaping at my face, its twisted metal teeth twinkling. When I woke up, I thought the dream hadn't quite ended. The scraping continued, that soft, whispery sound, and I opened my eyes and glanced at the window. I was covered up, a pillow over my head, and my eyes peeked from beneath the corner of the blanket. I was still half asleep, and as the crust broke away from my eyes, I thought I might still be dreaming. I saw the baby head, metal legs still scrabbling, pressing against the window. I lay still, watching the little creature bounce off the glass. Its scalp was a stubby patch of yanked out hair. Its one blue eye looked straight ahead, placidly, while the other yawned vacantly. The metal legs were bumping and rubbing, making scratching sounds against the glass. They didn't seem as dexterous as they had in my dream. The monster thing seemed like a Halloween decoration, something blown by the wind as it swung from a post. And as I watched it shake and spasm, I noticed the ring from the picture. That thick metal hoop ran through the head and connected it to a thick chain. I followed the chain, and the outline of a person began to come into view. He was framed perfectly against the privacy bushes in front of the window, his clothes blending seamlessly. He was tall, 6 feet at least, and his body was large and looked strong beneath his sweater. His face was doughy and pockmarked as it pressed against the window glass, his tongue wet and forming bubbles as it slid over the filthy glass. His flesh was pressed against the window as he looked into the shadowy room, his eyes searching for something. Thankfully, my son probably never saw him and had only ever seen the strange baby head necklace. If he had seen this strange face pressed against the window, he would have likely never slept in his bed again. The man's eyes found mine suddenly, his crazed look sobering a little as he realized I was not my son. We locked eyes, and I'm ashamed to say I did not deliver some piercing look that scared him away. In my dazed and fearful state, I was just as scared as my son was every night before he started screaming. We stared at each other for a count of 5 before he broke and ran off into the night. The police just left, taking a complete statement and checking the bushes for evidence. My son is asleep in my bed, my wife having wrapped him in her protective arms. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed and setting this to words while it's still fresh. Tomorrow I'm going to the hardware store. I'll be coming back with wood to board up the window. I don't care if this weirdo ever comes back or not. Before I let my son spend another night in that room, I will make sure no one ever peeks through that window. It began as a freak snowstorm. I've been hiking and camping in the woods outside of Kashmir since I was in high school. It was a spot I used to like to come to with my friends before they all got too busy to return to nature every now and again. The wilderness in North Georgia is just so beautiful. It's a great place to immerse yourself in nature and return to your roots. This weekend, however, I found myself at nature's mercy instead of its beauty. Well, maybe not nature. The longer I stay here, the more I suspect that something insidious might be in this place. When I set up my tent Friday afternoon, the temperature had been a little crisp, but nothing out of the ordinary. Spring has been in bloom, and it seemed unthinkable that it could get below 50 in the daytime. I had been meaning to hike deeper, coming back out again on Sunday, but when I woke up to find snow, I decided my weekend might be a bust. After gathering the gear I could find, I began hiking back to my truck. But I must have gotten turned around. As the day fretted out, I realized how lost I'd become. My usual landmarks were either covered in snow or changed so drastically that I didn't even recognize them. My compass was no help. The needle kept turning and turning, leading me in circles as I wandered through the snow. As I got more and more turned around, the night began to creep up on me. I was soon watching the sunset as I thought about whether or not to put up my tent or keep walking. And that was when I saw the light. It was small, like a candle on a windowsill. I'd never seen any houses out in the woods before, but it was possible that someone had built one in the 6 or 8 months since I had last been out here. I began heading in that direction, and as I did, I saw a cabin begin to materialize amidst the snow. A candle was burning on the windowsill, and as I approached, I began to look for signs of life. I saw no four-wheelers or any means of getting in and out. I was making sure to make a little noise, whistling and crunching loudly through the snow so as not to startle someone who might not want company. The cabin was not the sort of pre-made ones you sometimes saw in showrooms. It looked to have been made of sturdy trees, and the wood looked new and raw. Someone had built this recently, and it made me even more aware of whoever was inside. It was pretty likely that a gun lived there as well, and I was in no hurry to be a squib in the local paper. As I knocked on the door, I felt a little like Goldilocks trying to introduce myself to the three bears. I don't know what possessed me, but when no one answered, I tried the knob. It opened easily, and the door wasn't locked. So I stepped out of the snow to find a roaring fire in the grate of the one-bedroom cabin. It was humble. A bed, a table, a large bookshelf that seemed to stretch the length of one wall, some chairs, and the fireplace. It was so warm after having come out of the cold that I couldn't help myself. I stepped inside and made a beeline for the fireplace. I was careful not to track snow in, leaving my boots and pack on the front porch in the hopes that whoever lived there would recognize that I was here and not be startled. I don't know where the owner of the cabin was, but if they were out hunting in this weather, I wasn't likely to receive a warm welcome. Either way, I didn't think I had any options with the snow falling and the night fast approaching. I sat by the fire, and as the flames dried my clothes, I couldn't help but look at the huge bookshelf that stretched across the wall. It was floor to ceiling, and as big as it was, there was still space for more books. The books were numerous, about 30 in all, and their spines had the names of people instead of titles. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went and took the first one down. The name, Jeremy Blake, was printed in gold leaf on the spine, and when I opened it, it cracked in that satisfying way that old books do. The owner of the home probably wouldn't appreciate me perusing their bookshelf, but I figured I already had enough to apologize for. What was one more thing, right?
The inside was written in what appeared to be real ink, and the handwriting was delicate and practiced. Whoever Jeremy Blake had been, he'd been a very dab hand when it came to writing. I had assumed it was biographical, but the book didn't look old enough to have been written in 1736, as it claimed on the front cover. Jeremy talked about being out hunting deer with his brothers when they were suddenly set upon by a snowstorm. It had been snowing when they set out, but they now found themselves in a real blizzard. His brothers had left him when he couldn't keep up, and Jeremy thought he was about to die. That's when he saw the light out in the woods. He talked about coming upon the cabin, and how it had seemed so empty, but lived in. Like me, he had decided to thank the owner when he returned, and set about pinning this in his journal, which he'd brought with him. I pray the snow passes quickly. I would love nothing more than to return to my father's home, so that I might chastise my brothers for leaving me in such a sorry state. The next entry, though, was a little bit different. Jeremy had woken up to find that no one had returned to the cabin, and the snow was still falling outside. He had thought it looked a little better, and now that he was warm, he thought he might try to make his way home again. Jeremy opened the door to leave, but upon stepping out, he'd walked right back into the cabin instead. He tried this several more times, but always found himself stepping back into the warm, inviting cabin. There was only one door. When he tried to break a window in his fervor, he found they would not break. He became a little bit upset, fearing that he had stumbled into some kind of deviltry. He tried to leap through the window and nearly knocked himself unconscious. He had destroyed the house, flipped over tables and thrown chairs, but none of them had broken. When he turned around, it had all resumed its previous position, and Jeremy was certain that he had found some sort of witch's den and was most afraid. The next few days were full of entries about Jeremy continuing to live inside the cabin and discovering what it was all about. He found that he didn't need to eat or drink, which was both a blessing and a curse. Despite not needing these things, he found that he was always hungry and constantly licking his lips when his mouth felt dry. He watched from the window as the snow began to melt, and as winter became spring, he watched the animals roam outside the cabin. After a while, his entries became a journal of what he'd seen from the cabin's windows, until I discovered the last entry in this long series of observations. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I suppose it matters not. I've existed in this house for a long, long time. I cannot say how long, but I was not even 15 when I came in out of the cold, and now when I look at the glass over the fire, I see an old man staring back at me. I don't know how much longer I'll survive, but today I saw another person for the first time in a long time. I was looking out the window, watching the snow fall again, when a child came hesitantly from the tree line. He was looking at the small candle that had brought me here, but his eyes got big when he saw me looking back at him. He took a step towards the house, meaning to come inside or ask who I was, but I shooed him away. I think now that I should have let him open the door to see if I could escape, but I couldn't take the chance of that boy being stuck here as well. Better to die alone here than have some young fellow watch me pass. He scampered away when I banged on the glass and yelled at him. Probably for the best. I'm going to stop now. This journal does nothing but remind me that I'm alive. Maybe it would be better to be dead. I wasn't sure what to make of the journal. Was it real, or some make-believe story the owner had concocted? I looked at the bookcase and wondered if they were all like that. It was getting dark outside, so I took the second journal over to the fireplace so I could read it in the roaring light of the fire. Pine knot cracked as I got comfortable, and the whole experience was very rustic. The handwriting was a little rougher, not the same as the beautiful script of the previous one. Inside were the musings of a woodcutter. His writing was shorter, more surface level. He'd gotten lost while chopping wood and found the cabin on his way home. He stopped in to see who lived there and got himself trapped inside, just like the writer before him. He'd used his axe to try to break free, but to no avail. He'd taken up the book he found on the shelf and began writing to pass the time. Wasn't much, 3 or 4 pages before he stopped. He wrote about watching some squirrels, seeing a deer, and worrying that he would starve when he didn't find any food in the cabin. Whether he died or became bored, I don't know. He stopped writing about 5 pages in, signing Roland Wood at the bottom. The same name on the book spine, written in the same rough gold leaf that the words were written in. The next diary turned out to be a kind of fantasy story, something my grandpa would have called an oat opera. It talked about pioneers on the trail, one of them breaking off in the night to have a call of nature. He finds a strange cabin with a flickering candle, and once he went in, it refused to turn him loose. He spent a few pages talking about being trapped in the cabin, and when his sister came to look for him, he saw her and banged on the window to get her attention. She looked up, clearly startled, and ran away before she could help him. Whether she'd seen him or not, no one ever came to look for him. The rest of the journal was spent telling the story of the pioneers and what they must have seen on the trail. His sister seemed to be the main character, and he talked about the Indians they fought, the animals they hunted, and the things they survived on the way to their new home. Eventually she married a man, and the two lived on the prairie with their growing family on the outskirts of Preacher's Glen. Towards the end, he must have become a little jaded with the whole thing, and the story took a dark turn. His sister, her husband, and her children became riddled with hardships as the Indians descended upon their house, burning their crops and killing them all. The sister watched her family suffer for the crime of leaving her brother behind. The journal ended with her finally being allowed to die at the hands of her captors. He signed it William T. Pitt on the last page, and when I looked up from the story, I realized it was day again. As snow rattled loudly against the window, I had to wonder if it had only been a day. Jeremy's journal made it clear that the concept of time was a little wobbly. Had I been here a day? A week? A year? The snow was still blowing outside, but it didn't have to be the same storm that had brought me here. I looked at the door as I got up to put the book away, and wondered if I would find myself stepping right back into the cabin. I took a step towards the door, but I wasn't bold enough to try it yet. I needed more research first. With little else to do, I picked up the 4th journal. I noticed that William Pitt was on the spine of the 3rd one as I put it back, and Beverly Stryker was on the spine of the one I took down. It seemed that the cabin had finally attracted a female resident, and I was interested in getting her point of view on the whole situation. Beverly's story was a little different from the others. Miss Stryker was in trouble when she found the cabin. Beverly had been fleeing into the night to escape her abusive husband. She hadn't wanted to marry him. He was not the sort of man that women like to marry, but she had made the mistake of falling for him when she was young, not realizing what a brute he was until it was too late. By then, her father had decided that if his youngest daughter wanted to marry someone so far below her station, then he would let her. He had enough useless mouths to feed, useless mouths in need of dowries, and her husband had asked relatively little from him by way of a dowry. The two had been wed less than a year when Beverly had run away for the first time. He had found her easily enough. Her husband was a hunter, and her trail had been easy to follow. He had his farm hands tie her up in the barn and whipped her with a horsewhip he used on the colts when they were breaking them in. Her skin had been covered in welts, broken and red from the lashing, and Beverly had been left in the barn overnight to think about what she'd done. She thought all right, but it wasn't likely the reflection her husband had been thinking of. Beverly lay in the filthy hay all night, thinking about her current situation and planning her next escape attempt. She played the dutiful wife for the next 3 months, filling his cup, cooking his dinner, and keeping his house like he liked, until her husband grew lazy again. He stopped having the hands watch her so closely. He stopped locking the bolts every night so she couldn't escape. He stopped putting the dogs out every night so they would alert him when she left. Then one night, she ran, but not fast enough. He was after her sooner than she expected, and she had heard the bang of the dogs and the clump, clump, clump of the horses' hooves. She was running through the woods, the early autumn chill sending goosebumps up her skin. She hadn't gotten dressed in anything heavier than a shift. If he'd caught her getting dressed, he'd have known she meant to run. So now she ran in the light of the late-year moon, her body bathed in the golden light as she fled for her life. When she had fallen, she had expected to be ridden down out of hand, but the hooves and the dogs went past her as she lay curled in the boughs beneath a tree. The roots made a kind of cage, Beverly looking through the bars as she listened to insects and night birds singing their song. She expected to be found, expected to be caught, but as the night deepened, she found it was only her out in the wilderness. The dancing light had stolen her from her worries, and that was when she noticed the candle. Beverly found the cabin and had been trapped by the enticing cage. There wasn't much after that. She'd written a little more, but nothing as exciting as the night run through the forest. She read the journals and discovered that she couldn't leave, but there was none of the fear or uncertainty the others had shown. She was content in this place, a place her husband couldn't find. She lived inside the cabin, updating the journal sparingly and passing away with nothing to show for it, and no one the wiser. I looked at the door again, but the next book looked so inviting. Books became my food. I devoured them, reading some of them and taking their stories in. The cabin had attracted many in its lifetime, and I wondered how many more had chosen not to write. How many had suffered in silence here? How many had simply wasted away with nothing to mark their passing, except their memories? Those who had written had left behind everything from pages and pages of observation to short little stories about nothing at all. They wrote fantasies, westerns, slice-of-life stories about the people they'd left behind, and it all became more and more modern as time went on. I don't know how long I sat there reading, but it was snowing again when I looked up to find a journal in my hand with my own name on it. I opened it and found the pages as white and blank as the landscape outside my window. The doorknob was cold when I wrapped my hand around it. The wind was cold as it blew snow in through the open door. My boots were still on the porch, but they looked old and weather-beaten. The backpack was gone, likely dragged off by some animal while I was reading. The boots had been tan when I bought them less than a year before I entered the cabin. Now they looked bleached, the fabric thin as a mummy's cheek. I wanted to reach out and touch them, to see if my fingers would go through the thin skin of the boots, but I knew I would never get close to them. I stepped out onto the porch and found my foot coming down on the hardwood floor of the cabin. I closed the door and went back to the fire, picking up the journal with my name on it. If you're reading this, then it's already too late. I don't know if this place is supernatural or just some old pocket out of time, but I do know that it's a trap. I don't know if there's any escape from this place, but I know that no one's coming to look for me. I hope my diary is the last, but I have no doubt there will be others. The house seems to draw us to it, collecting stories as it collects lives. At least, I'll be warm before I die. I looked down at what I'd written, unsure of what else to say. It was barely a page, and the effort seemed lame. I was no writer. I'd never done more than emails or text messages. But as I struggled to find something to add to it, the futility of the exercise hit me all at once. If someone read it, they would be trapped anyway. My warning wouldn't help them, and my eyes slipped over to the fire as I thought about just burning it. Would it burn? I didn't know, but if the cabin wanted lives, then why give it what it wanted? Then I turned back to the door and thought of something a little different. An experiment might bear results. The book thumped onto the porch when I tossed it, and when I turned back to the bookshelf, it hadn't returned to its spot. The snow skittered across the pages, leaving wet runners on the paper as they marked them. They fluttered back and forth as the wind hit them. but the book was a little too heavy to be pushed by the wind. The snow seemed loath to come up on the porch, so I didn't think it would ruin it. When I closed the door, I hoped that someone would see it before they opened it. I had added a little bit at the end, and as I sat shivering by the fire, I hoped they would notice the book and follow the instructions before barging in. Knock 3 times and open the door. Under no circumstances come in. If the house is empty, run away as fast as you can. If I'm here, hopefully you can help me escape.
Mr. Fuller. The tall man looked up through the curtain of greasy black bangs, and his face was equal parts good-natured annoyance and unshakable certainty. Detective Cutter liked the annoyance. Annoyed men could become angry, and angry men could make mistakes. But the certainty was going to make this exchange difficult. A man who was certain was a man who would play the game to win, and Detective Cutter was just as certain that this man was guilty. "Do you know why you're here?" Cutter asked, and he put the box down between them as he stood leaning over Fuller. He could not have done this if Fuller was standing. Of course, if Fuller had been any further into 6 feet, he would have been playing basketball somewhere instead of writing crime novels. Cutter was all of 5 feet, and only because his red Irish curls put him over the limit. He stood over Fuller now, though, not glowering, but not smiling, from a position of power that Fuller's certain and almost bright smile did not seem to understand. The game was over in the 9th inning, Holmes, and now it was all over but the crying. Fuller looked up at him like a professor looking at a bright pupil who's just broken the cardinal rule and asked a foolish question. "Don't you know?" he asked in a deep, cultured voice that made Cutter want to start slapping him. "I assumed that you must have after 2 officers came to my office to collect me." "Collect you?" Cutter snorted. "Mr. Fuller, you were arrested, Mirandized, and placed in an interrogation room. I'd say that's about as far from collected as it gets." "Come on, Officer Cutter. We both know that if you could charge me with anything, we wouldn't be here having this little chat right now." Cutter grabbed the chair next to him and spun it so he could lean against the back as he sat. It was a distinctly juvenile posture, but he accepted it as he settled in for the long match. He was tired, bone-weary from chasing this guy's shadow for the last 3 weeks, and he'd be damned if he'd let him slip away now. Marcus Fuller was going to answer for these murders if he had to sit here all week, and Cutter was settling in for the long run. "My captain likes you for this. Hell, I like you for this, and we have solid evidence that if you didn't pull the trigger yourself, then you know who did." Fuller just rolled his eyes. "And why would I want to commit murder? I'm a very successful writer with 2 Sunday Times bestseller noir awards. I live very comfortably, and I could easily retire from writing after my next book and maintain that comfort for the rest of my life. Why would I jeopardize that by killing prostitutes and thugs?" "Let's talk about that prostitute, shall we?" Cutter said as he reached into the box and took a thick manila envelope out. He flipped it open onto 2 pictures of a pretty brunette in her early 40s. The top photo showed her inviting guests into a newly opened Royal Casino, while the bottom was her being booked a few years before for solicitation. Her expression was the same in both photos, devil-may-care attitude with a side order of iron poise. Marjorie Dyer, the proprietor of Dyer Needs, was found murdered in her suite at the Seawind Resort. He flipped the page, and behind it were several shots of a glassy-eyed Marjorie, who was no longer poised or so devil-may-care. She lay naked across a hotel bed, with a long, angry cut from one ear to the other, and a thick collar of blood clotting around the wound, making it hard to see. Hotel staff received a noise complaint about 11, and hotel security found her that way at 11:30. He had hoped the grisly scene would shock Fuller. He had hoped for revulsion, hoped Fuller would turn green or be sick in the wastebasket, or even that he would appear excited by the photos and tip his hand in front of the detective. Instead, he studied them for a moment and then looked back at Cutter expectantly. "Very graphic, Officer Cutter. What does this have to do with me?" Detective Cutter reached into the box as he spoke. "The murder scene of Marjorie Dyer is nearly the same as the killing of Catherine Hoff in your book Hunter City."
He removed a dog-eared paperback from the box, and Fuller didn't seem at all surprised to see it. "If you'll indulge me, Mr. Fuller," and before Fuller could protest, Cutter had opened the book to the paragraph in question. "Hold her, Jack. I'm about to send Regis a message." As the switchblade came to life, Kat began to struggle between Jack and Anthony. Her tears made black pools of her mascara, and when Hunter lifted her chin to look her in the eye, she had long tracks down either side of her face. He waggled the blade in front of her, and she cringed away as the steel glinted in her eyes. "Please, Glenn, please don't do this. We could make a deal. I'll work for you instead of Regis, but please don't hurt me." And she dissolved into shuddering sobs again. She stopped when Hunter pressed the edge against her throat. "It's nothing personal, Kat. It's just business." She sighed like a split seam as the knife parted her flesh and her blood poured across the swell of her modest breasts. When Hunter's gentleman released her, she fell back onto the bed with a kind of boneless grace. Hunter only spared her a final glance before he strode into the hall and left her alone in his makeshift abattoir. Fuller indulged him as he read, and when Cutter finished, he only sat expectantly. "What do you make of that, Mr. Fuller?" Cutter asked, when it seemed Fuller would not break the silence. "Seems like a fan of my work decided to reenact some of his favorite scenes. As I told you the first time you came snooping around my office, I was at a charity event that night. 12 people will corroborate that I was present until well past midnight. So unless I'm under arrest for writing a compelling crime drama, are you familiar with the murder of Gerald and Jamal Smith, Mr. Fuller?" Cutter cut him off mid-sentence. Men like Fuller hated to be cut off, and he felt confident that the act would unnerve him. It didn't. "I'm afraid I'm not," Fuller said, crossing his arms and appraising Detective Cutter with light disapproval. They were hired muscle for Selectman Kane, a local crime boss in the area, all three of whom also bear a striking resemblance to Boyle, Barker, and Regis Angel from Hunter Street. Fuller rolled his eyes and sighed deeply in his throat. "Do tell." Both Gerald and Jamal were visiting a tavern below Kane's office when their drinks were spiked with Rohypnol. Both were large men, Mr. Fuller, and both had a lot of experience with guns, as did Boyle and Barker. Boyle and Barker, as you recall, were drugged by Glenn Hunter before he assailed the home of Regis Angel. Both sets were shot on the stairs as they tried to return to their boss. Their nerves dulled, they were easy prey for both Glenn Hunter and our current mystery killer. Then, of course, there's the nature of Selectman Kane's death. "Let me guess," said Fuller. "Drowned in the bath?" Cutter flipped through the file and settled it back on the table. "Close. Drowned in the sink." The photos were of a man in his late 50s, lying face up in a utility sink. His shoulders had been forced down into the wide basin, and his face was a spiderweb of cuts and scratches where the faucet had battered him. One of his eyes bulged grotesquely, as the other stared glassily at the photographer. Fuller looked at this with no more interest than he had the others, and when he looked up, his eyes questioned Cutter on what he hoped to accomplish. He didn't catch Selectman Kane in the bath. He was forced to improvise by drowning him in a utility sink. Kane fought, but forensics says his attacker finally broke his back and forced him down into the utility sink to properly drown him. That's not from one of my books, Officer Cutter, as well you know. No, but Hunter did drown Regis in a bathtub after killing his bodyguards in a stairwell. I got the passage somewhere here. He removed his copy of Hunter Street from the box as well. He turned to the back and saw Fuller wince as he bent the pages back to read the highlighted paragraph. That's more of a reaction than he had given to the entire photo album, Cutter thought, as his eyes found the spot. Hunter watched as Wagner's eyes went wide as he pushed through the bathroom door. Wagner reached for the gun in his jacket, but the little silenced pistol in Hunter's hand woofed softly. He felt the angry burn as the acoustics of the bathroom turned the Rise of the Valkyries into a cover for the loud, wet slap of the body as it hit the floor. Hunter entered the small door between the bathroom and the washroom unnoticed. As he pushed the large form of Regis Angel under the water, he was rewarded with total surprise. The old man was still quite strong, and had it not been for the surprise of the attack and the slippery bathtub in which he was lounging, Hunter thought that he would have been in for a real fight. As he drowned him, he bent over him so he could watch the life leave his eyes. If you watch a powerful man draw his last breath, some of his spirit will be transferred to you, boy. His grandfather had told him this 1,000 times if he told him once. As the struggling stopped and the great shadow of Regis Angel left the world, however, Hunter felt little save the deep sense of satisfaction and a staggering sense of loss. "You're reaching, Detective," Fuller scoffed, but Cutter noticed the change in title, and it seemed a victory, if a small one. "He was drowned on his back, Mr. Fuller, which leads us to believe his attacker wanted to watch him die." "Which supports the theory of a copycat," Fuller barked, pushing up from his seat to glower at Cutter. "Just because you beat this dead horse over and over again, Detective, does not mean it's going to give you anything but... Your third book was a bit of a disappointment, wouldn't you say, Mr. Fuller?" That shut him right up. He stopped mid-sentence and goggled at Cutter, as if he couldn't believe what he just heard. If Fuller wanted to play the copycat game, Cutter was ready to drop his final bit of damning evidence. He was more than happy to let Fuller back himself into the corner first, though. Fuller blew out a long breath. "I don't see how that's relevant at all to your case." "A dozen rewrites, not well received by the fans, and the reception at the ending was bad enough that you had to write a 4th book and turn the Hunter trilogy into a Hunter quartet. That had to sting a little, wouldn't you say?" That was a decision I made on my own," he snapped, but Cutter didn't care. He had this guy, and he knew it. The first 2 pieces were only appetizers, and after he served up the main course, he'd be more than happy to give this guy his just desserts. "Well, the most recent murder was very reminiscent of another scene from your book." "Oh, please do tell. Someone kill a big stupid brute on the street with a machine gun? Poison a congressman? Maybe slit a whore up the..." Cutter threw down an open folder and watched the pompous prick deflate like an old balloon. "We had to request the manuscript from his secretary when we found out you had written a 4th novel. She was so distraught that she sent it over immediately. This, Mr. Fuller, is the reason you're here." Fuller looked far more unsettled by these photos than anything else that day. This can't be. I just talked to Dan last week. Danforth Wilde was murdered in his apartment last week, 3 days after you threatened him over social media for stealing the premise of Hunter State for his noir series. You said you would make him regret every word he published, didn't you? I guess maybe he regrets it now, doesn't he? Fuller sat, looking at the pages for several seconds, before closing his eyes and sighing. He was eviscerated, just like the congressman in Hunter's stand. My agent was the only one who had a copy of the manuscript, so of course, you think... He closed the folder and glared at Cutter. "Hook me to a lie detector, Detective. Call my assistant and ask her where I was when Dan was killed. I have no receipts for travel, I have taken no leave from work, and you will find no way I could have done these things. Now, unless you're prepared to hold me under suspicion, I demand that you release me." Cutter stared at him for nearly a minute before shaking his head with a deep sigh. He had hoped he could grill the answers out of Fuller, but the guy was too slick for that. His captain was going to rake him over the coals for this one, and Cutter could already hear the sounds of pens signing his leave of absence. "Go then," he said, waving his hand at the door, and Fuller left with a little slam as the door shut behind him. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of suspension from duty. Cutter drained the whiskey from his glass and slid it back towards Mike. He had had his first drink right here at the Fighting Cock, and he suspected it would be where he took his last. You shake enough trees like he had, and you were bound to have something fall on you eventually. Guys like Fuller, though, they made him ache for a drink. The door jingled, and Cutter didn't even look up as someone plopped down next to him. They thought I might find you here," said a familiar, cultured voice. "I need your help." Cutter blew a chuckle into his shot as he knocked it back. "You dance around justice, get me suspended for 3 weeks, and expect me to..." He flinched a little when he looked at him. Fuller had a long, jagged cut across his face, and his left eye looked like a few more punches would have broken the socket. He caught Mike's eye, and the barman seemed to be trying to decide whether to call the police or let Cutter handle this. In the end, he offered him a rag from behind the bar and slouched off out of earshot. Fuller sat down next to him, and his eyes darted towards the door like a trapped animal. "I need you to protect me. The man who's been murdering these people has been staying with me for several months now. He's also responsible for the 4th Hunter book, and until tonight, I thought his killings were something benign, a way to clean up the streets, if you will. When I confronted him about Dan, though, he just went crazy and tried to kill me in my apartment." "Slow down," said Cutter, as he took a pad from his pocket. "Let me get some information first." He wobbled a little on his stool as the alcohol settled over him like a cloud. The shots were beginning to catch up with him, but he wanted to be sure he got everything verbatim. If he could bring this information to his captain, then maybe they'd rescind his suspension. "Let's start with a name. Who tried to kill you?" Fuller took a deep breath before saying the last name Cutter would have ever expected. "Glenn Hunter."
I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release, so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison. I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. "Yeah, sorry, we filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job." I gritted my teeth and resist the urge to rage at him. "Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back?" "'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it." I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. "That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today." I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant. The kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from." He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon.
It was an old two-story with a peeling exterior, and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first. I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I'd just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing. I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot, like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep, black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking, a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you, not just half-assing it like you did today. I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Jack said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone. When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs, and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest, and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup, and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly, I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was..." "Jack, you gotta get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I had gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. "Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find." That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out.